Talking about the Canucks is easy. It is. It is very easy for me to discuss the Canucks ad nauseum. Um, as of right now, I believe they're up 1-0 on Dallas. I'll put them within one game of 500, or fake 500 as I call it, thanks to loser points. And all would seem to be well in Canucks Nation if they pull off a win in Dallas. Although Dallas hasn't been playing very well themselves. But I digress. When discussing the history of the Vancouver Canucks, it is worthy of note that I haven't seen a Canucks star come through yet who hasn't been ridiculed. A lot. Trevor Linden is well respected now, but at the time when he was playing, mostly from fans of other cities. I remember when the Canucks transferred him to center, and there was a lot of criticism about how the Canucks didn't have any natural born centers, and they were having to move Trevor Linden from right wing to center, and it was never going to work. I remember Bure got a lot of criticism for his soft play. He didn't play soft in the beginning, but once he started making big money, those big hits didn't appeal to him so much anymore, because if he tried one of those big hits and failed, he could be losing a lot of money. And while I was as upset as anybody to see the physical side of Bure's game disappear, he did have a point. And he did start suffering injuries, and you can't play that physical game when you're a little injury prone, so made sense. I've watched the Canucks go through their darkest times with Messier, Bure, and McGillney in the lineup. That's right. Messier, Bure, and McGillney. And the only one that's not in the Hall is McGillney. And Alex McGillney eventually will get into the Hall of Fame. I've watched the Canucks fail in the 80s miserably. And the dark times that were the 80s, I mean, I've talked about it in videos ad nauseum, and they were darker than I make them appear. There was no Canuck fan in British Columbia at the start of the year that said, oh boy, when we get to the playoffs, this year's going to be different. Back then, you had 16 out of 21 teams made the playoffs, so making the playoffs wasn't a big deal, especially when the Kings were bad and the Jets were bad and the Canucks were bad. So two bad teams out of three were going to make the playoffs. It was no accomplishment. One thing about expanding to 31 teams next year is it makes it even more of an accomplishment to make the playoffs. And what worries me is they're going to expand the playoffs. The NHL wants more revenues, and they want to give the appearance that there's more teams competing for the same amount of spots, and that everybody has a legitimate shot at a Stanley Cup playoff appearance, even if that's not possible. Now, in terms of the Canucks franchise, it's gone through a lot. And I remember the Arthur Griffiths days when the passion was there from ownership, even if the results weren't necessarily great on the ice at first. And then they got better. And they got better through trading away Dan Quinn and Garth Butcher and getting back Sergio Momesso, who I may call meathead and complain about him a lot, but really he was a poor man's Milan Lucic at the time. Jeff Courtnall, who was the best goal scorer the Canucks ever had in terms of scoring key goals at exactly the right time. Whether it was an overtime goal, game winner you needed late in the game, whether it was some big rallying cry you needed, Jeff Courtnall was the guy to get it for you. Cliff Ronning, one of the most underrated players I've seen. All he did was score points wherever he was. He was picked up by expansion teams and just kept scoring. And he is, to this day, one of my all-time favorite Canucks. And they got, I believe Robert Dirk was in the same trade. And Dirk, while not the most mobile, he was a serviceable 5'6" guy. And the Canucks really came through that from that trade as a better team, even if the results didn't show it right away. The 92 yearbook I have here, and I believe I went through it when I got it, which was a few months ago now. And it basically says, yeah, the Canucks picked up Ronning and Courtnall and Momesso and Dirk, but they're still not very good. The reality was they picked up a line in exchange for Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn had bounced around the league for a reason, and he continued to bounce around the league after that. for a reason. I'm not getting into those reasons because that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about the Canucks franchise history. Notice I'm not looking through books. When Pavel Bure was drafted, it was Pat Quinn pulling a fast one on the NHL. He drafted him in, I think it was 113th overall. It was the 5th round. And there were teams that challenged that draft pick immediately because there was some question about whether or not he was eligible. And the Canucks had made sure he was eligible before they picked him. They pulled a fast one. There's no way Pavel Bure drops to the 5th round if other teams knew he was eligible. No chance. And Bure being drafted, Larionov coming over, Krutov coming over was a failure in terms of Vladimir Krutov. Didn't have the personal control, the self-control. When Larionov and Krutov came over, they escaped the iron fist of Viktor Tikhonov and his crew. And they got away from the Red Army and its control over everything they did, everything they ate, every waking moment of the day. Both Larionov and Krutov struggled when they got to North America. But Larionov was still in shape. Krutov was not. Krutov was not a bad player, but he was out of the league within 2 years. Larionov, on the other hand, adapted, got better, and by the time he left Vancouver, which was a sadness, if the Canucks had held on to him for another year, they would have owed another transfer payment back to the Soviet Union, now Russia. And Larionov said, no, I don't want any more money going back to the Russians. I won't allow the Canucks to do that. And he was put on waivers and went to San Jose, which cleared any NHL team from having to pay further money to the Soviet Union. Now Russia, sorry. While I respected Larionov's steadfast beliefs in the matter, I truly look back at the 94 team that was this close to the Stanley Cup, and I say, wow, if they'd had Larionov down the middle, if they'd had Larionov to go up against Mark Messier, that series goes the other way. The Canucks win the Stanley Cup. But, that comes back to another issue as a Vancouver fan. I have spent 35 years hearing about how Swedes are soft. And I know everybody's going to say, he's talking about the Sedins, not just the Sedins. I'm going back to Thomas Gradin, boys and girls. I'm going back to Lars Lindgren. If you want to talk Europeans, we can talk about Rick Lands. We can talk about Yuri Bubla during his brief time as a Canuck. We can talk about Ivan Holinka. The Canucks have had a wealth of Europeans in their ranks. Now they have a GM who seems to be determined to bring in, yes, Tramkin's a Russian. Yes, he does draft Europeans, but he seems to be more determined to bring in guys like Besser, Shinkarik, who got traded, McCann, who got traded. He seems to want less the European flavor when he makes the draft, and yet when he's trading, he's bringing that European flavor in, which is guys like Marcus Granlund. The Canucks have a tradition of that European bent in the lineup. The problem is, in some people's eyes, not mine, that makes them soft in the playoffs. I don't think the Sedins have played any softer in the playoffs than skilled North American players. I'm not talking about Lucic. I'm not talking about Neely. That's not their game. But I don't look at the Sedins and say that they're softer than any Canadian skilled players. They're relied on to score points, not to make those big hits. And they've absorbed a ton of punishment in their entire careers. And people can say, oh, well, Canuck fans whine when the Sedins get hit. It's not that a Canuck fan will whine if a Sedin gets hit. It's when a dirty hit happens, it's going to be against the Sedins, because the Sedins have been the only offensive threat this team's been able to put on the ice for the last 10 years. The only consistent offensive threat the Canucks have had for over a decade has been Henrik and Daniel. You can rotate out guys like Burrows and Kessler and other players who've come in and made that, like Dimitra had a year, Verbata had a year. You can look back over the last 10, 12 years and say, oh, this guy was good, and this guy was good, and this guy was good. But that consistent thread is the Sedin. So if I'm the opposing coach, if I'm the Calgary coach, Edmonton, Boston, whoever, who am I going to target? I'm going to target Daniel or Henrik because I know damn well they're the only ones who can beat me. Now, with what the Canucks have going on right now, Bo Horvat is emerging as an actual legitimate 30-goal scorer, a legitimate two-way threat, two-way force in hockey. And I am thrilled to see that happening. As an organization, and one question I get a lot is, well, should the Canucks tank for Nolan Patrick? I don't think Nolan Patrick's worth tanking for. I don't think Liljegren is worth tanking for. I don't think tanking is the right way to put it. I've never seen the Canucks tank on purpose. And I watched them play some pretty crappy hockey. Here's the problem, though. I'm going to put this one aside. Canucks drafting record, not great. And, you know, a lot of people point their finger at Gillis. But it goes further back than that. 2002, they had no first-round draft pick. 2003, they draft Ryan Kessler, fantastic pick. 2004, they draft Corey Schneider, fantastic pick, and they get Alex Edler in the third round. 2005, they draft Luc Bourdon. Luc Bourdon's no longer with us. Good pick, but he's no longer with us. And I'm not going to say whether good, bad, doesn't matter. That makes that just a null pick. Mason Raymond's grabbed in the second round. 2006, Michael Grabner. Grabner, by the time he became a useful player, has moved on to the Islanders. Everybody complains about the trade to Florida. Here's the thing. Florida didn't see it either, and they waived him, and he went to the Islanders. So this, you know, regardless, he didn't help the Canucks at all. 2007, Patrick White's the first-round draft pick. 2008, it's Cody Hodgson. Jan Sauve was the second-round draft pick. Run over by a car, never the same after that. 2009, Jordan Schrader's the draft pick. Everybody's all ballyhooed about Jordan Schrader dropped in the draft. This kid's small, but man, he's talented. Teams are really going to regret passing on him. Nope. Patrick McNally's the first draft pick taken in 2010, but it's 115 picks into the draft. Nicholas Jensen's picked up in 2011 as the 29th pick. Where's he right now? On the Canucks organization. 2011, Brendan Gaunce, picked 26th overall. I love Gaunce. I'm going to go out on the record and say I love Brendan Gaunce for what he does. He plays the game with heart and passion. Not a talented forward. Probably looking at his talent level, looking at the numbers he's going to put up in his career, probably more suited to be a second or third round draft pick than a first. So again, 2013, Bo Horvat, fantastic pick. Problem, you traded Corey Schneider to get him. It's the only way to get Bo Horvat, I get it, but it kind of sucks because Corey Schneider is one of the best goaltenders of his generation. 24th overall pick, Hunter Shinkaruk, has now turned into Marcus Granlund. Read into that what you will. Shinkaruk's not tearing up the league right now. Didn't play great in Calgary this year when he was given the chance. And Shinkaruk has bust written all over him. 2014, Jake Virtanen. I've been on about Virtanen over and over and over again. I'm not talking about him again. Jared McCann, 24th overall. Decent pick. Hasn't put up points. Went to Florida. Goodbranson comes back. 2015, Besser's the pick. He has to sign in Vancouver. 2016, Hugh Levy. Still, jury's out on that one. So, let's look back. Actually, this magazine has it. I might have even bookmarked the page. Talk amongst yourselves. Nah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Yep, Vancouver's top draft picks. 1970, Dave Tallon's drafted number 2 overall right after Gilbert Perreault. 1971, Jocelyn Guermont is the number 1 pick, number 3 overall. 1972, Don Lever's the number 3 draft pick. Fantastic player. 1973, Dennis Verbeegert is drafted number 3 overall. Number 4 overall in 1977 is Jerry Gillis. As much as I love Jerry Gillis, not a number 4 draft pick. 1978, number 4 overall, Bill Derlego. Great player. Went to Toronto. Whoops. Tiger Williams was a fantastic player. Probably not worth Build Your Lego. And, in 1979, the Canucks drafted Rick Vive, number 5 overall. Whoops, went to Toronto. And people wonder why I worry about them trading draft picks before they've really fully realized their potential. 1980, the Canucks draft Rick Lands, number 7 overall. Really good player, probably not a number 7 draft pick. 1981, Garth Butcher's draft, number 10. Garth Butcher put so much sweat and blood into his jerseys that I will not say a bad word about him. 1982, Michel Petit was drafted number 11 overall. Petit was traded a lot, and there was a reason. Decent offensively, horrible defensively, and just not a great player. 1983, Cam Neely's drafted number 9 overall. Hey, look, it's a future Hall of Famer. Oh, sorry guys. We traded him to Boston for Barry Peterson. Peterson, though, at the time was coming off of a season where he'd scored 76 points, and he had scored 100 in the NHL before. So the Canucks thought, okay, this guy's a skilled center, and it shores up our top 2. I believe Patrick Sundstrom was the number 1 at the time, so Sundstrom and Peterson down the middle. This is going to be great. We're going to compete with everybody in the Smythe. Problem was, Cam Neely immediately became a star forward with Boston because Boston suited his game. Vancouver did not. 1984, drafted number 10 overall, J.J. Daigneault. He's a good player for Montreal. 1985, number 4 overall draft pick, Jim Sandlak. Love Sandlak, not a number 4 draft pick. 1986, Dan Woodley, drafted number 7 overall. No. Number 2 overall in 1988 was Trevor Linden, drafted right behind Mike Modano. So again, the Canucks get a fantastic player. At number 2, they get Trevor Linden. They miss out on Modano. And I love Linden and everything he brought to the game, but he was not a Mike Modano. 1989, number 8 overall, they draft Jason Herter. They might as well just stayed home with that one. 1990, number 2 overall, they draft Peter Nedved. Not bad. Number 4 is Jaromir Jagr. And Nedved was a pain in the ass most of the time he was a Canuck. Royal pain in the ass. 1990, Sean Antoski's drafted number 18 overall. They got a good guy to trade with him, though. So, yeah, Sean Antoski. The Canucks drafted Goons, but because it was the 90s, Goons had some actual value. 1991, they go with another Goon as Sean Antoski's drafted, Alex Stoyanov's drafted number 7 overall. They flipped him for Marcus Naslund, I believe. 1994, they draft Matthias Oland at number 13 overall. Oland almost won the Calder his first year, and Oland honestly is a player I look back at and say he had the potential to be so much more than what he was. 1996, number 12 overall is Josh Holden. Probably not the best draft pick they could have made at 12 overall. 1997, 10th overall, they draft Brad Ferentz. I like Brad Ferentz. Not a top draft pick. Definitely not a top draft pick. Andrew Ferentz was a better player than Brad Ferentz. 1998, Brian Allen's drafted number 4 overall. Had a very good career. Not a good one in Vancouver. But was used to get Jovanovski. So, see, the Canucks do better with trading than with drafting. This is part of the reason why I worry in the Benning era because he seems to be okay at the draft table, and then he trades badly. So that's a really bad combination. 1999, they move hell and high water to get Daniel and Henrik Sedin, and I'll get into that in a bit, at 2 and 3. The franchise, still 15 years later, and they still get just as much criticism as they did their first year in the NHL when their scoring was not what it would become. Their first 3 or 4 years in the NHL, they couldn't score. They had all the talent in the world. Right from day one, everybody could see it. The way that they innately always knew where each other were. That being twins and having this ability to sense the other one on the ice. It was fantastic. It was so much fun to watch. And in the end, will it end up with them in the Hall of Fame? I hope so, but I don't know, because the perception seems to be outside Vancouver they're not that great. And it's too bad. Because by 80s totals, if you had 80s goal scoring going on right now and through their whole careers, they're probably 14 or 1500 point players instead of flirting with 1,000. 2000, the Canucks draft number 23 overall, Nathan Smith. Again, might as well stay home. 2001, they draft R.J. Umberger at number 16. And then in 2003, they draft Ryan Kessler at 23. Problem is, Umberger and Kessler frigging hate each other. So Umberger won't play in Vancouver. Other reasons too, but Umberger ends up being just gone, and Umberger's a wasted pick. 2004, they draft Corey Schneider at 26 overall, and of course, everybody knows what happened there. And from there on, the draft picks are where I mentioned them there. That's the Canucks draft history. It's not great. It just isn't. The Canucks draft history is one that I'm not overly proud of, and I wish I were. The Canucks have been through the ringer, and Canucks fans have been through the ringer. I think what gets forgotten sometimes is that, you know, we support the team, but I don't know very many people who support every single player on the team. I've been criticized for criticizing individual members of the team. Been told, well, you can't be a Canuck fan if you don't, love every member of the team. Well, I don't. Can't be a Canuck fan if you don't love the coach and love what everything the team does. Well, that's just crazy. The passion the Canuck fans feel for their team is no less than what Montreal fans feel or Toronto fans feel, but the frustration is real. And this video is being done kind of about that frustration. And it's a frustration built on getting close. 82, they got close, kind of. See, the 82 run gets talked about. Let's talk about the 82 run. They play Calgary. Calgary was pretty close to Vancouver in terms of points, in terms of just the way that they played. But the Canucks win that series, and then luckily they get LA in the next round because LA upset the Oilers. The beast that would become the Oilers a year later. Well, it got knocked down in the first round by the Kings in the most improbable series ever. Miracle in Manchester, I believe it's referred to as. And so Vancouver had home ice in the next round. Vancouver, who did not have a winning record, got home ice in the next round. And that is something that I, to this day, look at and say, well, that's a big part of the reason why the Canucks got what they got. Okay, one second. The 94 run was a year late. The 93 Canucks were I would say the 92 Canucks were the best Canucks team. 93 was close second, and then 94 was getting further away. They got further in the playoffs, but I still think the 91-92 Canucks were the best team the Canucks had they not run into the Oilers. And then in 93, they ran into the Gretzky-led Kings. In 94, they got a hell of a lot further than that. And I honestly look at the 94 Canucks and I say, well, that was close. What could have been if it had been anybody but Lafayette who hits that post. They don't hit the post, they bury it. The 2011 Canucks, and I've heard people say silly things like, well, if Ham Hughes wasn't hurt, the Canucks win that series. Oh, it was more than one player. There was a complete and total mental breakdown by the entire team. And who took the flack? Luongo, the guy who had to shut out the Bruins to get a win, and the Sedins, who are two players of 18 on the ice. Did they have a good final? No. The worst final belonged to Christian Ehrhoff. And Ehrhoff went out and got a 10-year, $40 million deal from Buffalo for his troubles. And Ehrhoff was so badly overmatched against the Bruins, it was sad. So when Canuck fans say, oh, I really wish we still had Ehrhoff, I don't. But that's me. I'm not a real Canuck fan, right? All right. Canucks' biggest trades. Vancouver trades its first overall draft choice to Atlanta for second overall, Daniel Sedin, and a conditional third-round draft choice, Henrik Sedin. In a masterful series of, I think that means third overall, not third round, third overall draft choice. I don't know why they got third round in here. In a masterful series of wheeling and dealing, Canucks general manager Brian Burke orchestrated three separate but related transactions on the draft floor in 1999. The last of these maneuvers landed Burke in the enviable position of holding second and third overall selections. Atlanta had its sights set on forward Patrick Steffen. How did that work out for the Thrashers? How did it work out for you guys? Oh, yeah, they're not there to answer me. Whom the Thrashers chose with the top pick. Burke then approached the draft table with a pair of Canucks sweaters in hand, selecting the highly touted twins from Sweden, Daniel and Henrik. The brothers had made it clear to all prospective teams that they wished to play together. Vancouver fans quickly understood their desire after watching the Sedins' mutual understanding of each other's position on the ice, creating highlight reel goals with tape-to-tape passes that only could come from innate sibling rival chemistry. In 2010 and 2011, the Sedins made history. Henrik and then Daniel won scoring titles, becoming the first brothers to achieve the feat in consecutive seasons. Burke had to make preceding deals with Chicago and Tampa Bay to land the coveted selections, trading McCabe and several high draft picks of his own. But as the Sedins have evolved into the top two scorers in Canucks history, there's no debate about the success of this plan. March 20th, 1996 gets the honorable mention. Pittsburgh trades Marcus Naslund to Vancouver for Alex Stoyanov. Yeah, I will say this in Pittsburgh's defense. Naslund looked like a bust at the time. He, even in his first two seasons as a Canuck, did not play particularly well, couldn't score goals, was frustrating to Canuck fans. There were frequently rumors about, oh, we got to get rid of this guy. He's got to go. He's a loser. He's an idiot. He's not making it. And then all of a sudden he turned it on. And there had been no sign of that at the time. The late Pat Quinn landed Marcus Naslund for the Canucks in one of the most lopsided deals in NHL history. The Vancouver general manager noticed that Naslund was being underused in Pittsburgh, so he offered Alex Stoyanov to the Penguins in exchange. And then it kind of glosses over the fact that, yeah, Naslund was underused. The other article I had in here that had been marked off was about the towel incident with Roger Nielsen, which I've talked about in videos before, which is that the Canucks felt they were getting screwed over by the referees during a game between Chicago and Vancouver. That doesn't happen now, does it, Canuck fans? Anyways, so Canucks bench boss Roger Nielsen got upset, took a white towel, threw it on a stick, and put it up. We surrender. Tiger Williams and a couple other, I think there were a couple other Canucks did it too. And they didn't win that game. But when they came home after that game, Canuck fans were waving towels they brought from home. There were no towels, as far as I know, back in 1982 being handed out at the door. It was an organic movement that Canuck fans embraced immediately, and Towel Power was born. And that came out of Vancouver. The saddest thing when I look at the Canucks, and I look at my 35 years following them, and I followed them through, and I had to think, like, which jersey do I want to wear for this? This one. This is a jersey the Canucks wore when everybody was trying something different. And it's got the gradients, and I like it. And I liked it then. But this was in 96. This was when the Stanley Cup finalists of 94 were all being moved out. And the team that was replacing them was pretty awful. The Canucks were bad. They were very bad. And they were very bad for about 3 years. And then it turned around. And then we got into the West Coast Express era and Marcus Naslund leading the team and the push that came from that. And then in 2011, they get all the way to the final. Being a Canuck fan means you're buying into the fact that your team has got a pretty poor history in terms of winning. They're not a 500 team for the franchise's record overall. They probably never will be. They are a team that has won President's trophies with the Sedins and with Luongo, and yet those three players were the most disrespected players I felt in the league as a Canuck fan. Just from stuff I read online and just from what I would hear in Hockey Central and just from all over. I would hear about how Luongo couldn't win a big game and Luongo choked all the time and the Sedins could never come up in big games, even though they did. Even though they did. Let me go ahead and take a look here. And I'm just going on. I haven't looked this up. I haven't looked this up. Let me just take a quick boo here while I've got your undivided attention. So in 102 playoff games, Daniel Sedin has 71 points, 25 goals, 46 assists. Henrik Sedin in 105 playoff games has 23 goals, 55 assists, 78 points. So we contrast that with, let's just go crazy here. Sidney Crosby, best player of his generation. 124 games, 49 goals, 137 points. Barely over a point a game. And I know people are out there going, but he's the best player. I know. I'm not saying they're in that league. I'm saying that when people complain that the Sedins don't play in big in the playoffs, well, if you look at Crosby, and if you just look sheerly at point totals, he didn't have a point a game last year in the playoffs. He had 19 points in 24 games. Let's go back to the Sedins again. And again, I know there's people out there right now, oh, whatever. Henrik Sedin in the playoff run in 2011, 25 games, 19 assists, 22 points. 2011, Daniel Sedin, 25 games, 9 goals, 20 points. The Sedins, anytime the Canucks have done well in the playoffs, they've done very well. In 08-09, no, in 2009, 2010, Henrik Sedin, 12 games, 14 points. Daniel Sedin, 12 games, 14 points. And that was the year they got eliminated by Chicago. And what did I hear after that series was over? Sedins will never win. So, Leafs fans talk about disrespect, and it's there. The Leafs organization gets disrespected. Oilers fans, disrespect. It's true. After 10 years of missing the playoffs, there's a lot of disrespect. But then those same people will come out and say Sedin sisters. Luongo choked. I saw 7 Luongo for years. And everybody ignores the good in favor of the bad. And that, in essence, is why when I'm doing a Canucks history review, I'm not using all these stories and all these tales, and I'm not able to condense it into 15, 20 minutes. I'm not talking about championships and glory here. I'm talking about teams that have been put together by management that sometimes has been incompetent. Pat Quinn. Dan Quinn was shipped out by Pat Quinn. Pat Quinn put together a good team and then went, done. And he did nothing to improve it. That's why Pat Quinn didn't stay. Brian Burke came in and went, okay, I got to change this. So he made changes and then went, done. And then he wouldn't change the core. Dave Nonis came in. Nonis went, Burke's core looks good to me. Brought in Luongo and went, done. And he went out and Mike Gillis came in. Gillis said, oh, this team is nowhere near a Stanley Cup. I got to make some major changes. Kept the core exactly the same, made a few minor sprinkling changes. The Canucks magically came back to life with almost the same team that Nonis had the year before, and Gillis is GM of the year. Great job. You picked up Kyle Wellwood. Fantastic. Kyle Wellwood. Anyways, a few years later, Gillis is fired. He's an idiot. Jim Benning comes in. And now we're in this period with Benning, where everybody's talking about Benning being an idiot. Myself included on occasion, where he makes moves and I go, I don't know what you're thinking. Okay. Fine, do that. It is the frustration of being a Canuck fan. It is the frustration of knowing that, and knowing this. Somebody asked me on a video last week, how do you do this? My team's down and out, and so's yours. Canucks are down and out. How do you still cheer for them when they're down and out? It's what I do. It's what Canuck fans do. It's what we did in the 80s. It's what we did in the late 90s. It's what we did after the West Coast Express era died off. We've done it over and over and over and over, and we'll do it over and over again. Do I think the Canucks will ever win a Stanley Cup? That's the question you're going to ask me, isn't it? My answer? No. My reason? There's 30 teams in the NHL. The Canucks have to beat 29 of them. There's going to be 31 next year. Canucks have to beat 30 of them. The odds are stacked against any team winning the Stanley Cup. There has to be so many things that add up for you. And the Canucks over their history have shown no sign of it other than 94 and 2011. And for whatever reason, both results went against them. Boston outplayed them badly. It was a 7-game series because Luongo refused to just, roll over and die. They were ahead 3-2, and then they shit the bed in game 6 and 7. They were terrible from top to bottom in game 6 and 7. Just awful. 94 or 80, yeah, 94. The Canucks were a good team, came together at the right time, and the wrong guy had that shot at the empty net and hit the crossbar. If that game goes to overtime in game 7 and 94, the Canucks win it. And in 82, yeah, I didn't finish the 82 story because it really doesn't matter. They get to the semifinals. They play Chicago, who, survived over teams like Minnesota and St. Louis, who were much better and had better records. So the Canucks got home ice again against Chicago. Did they get home ice in the final? No. Home ice advantage went to a team called the New York Islanders, who steamrolled Vancouver. Toyed with them, played with them, and beat the crap out of them. So 82 was a miracle run, right up until the final when they got smacked around. It was only a miracle run because all of the good teams got knocked out by other teams. All the Canucks had to do was just not lose at home. And they did that well. And I give them full credit. But as a Canucks fan, at some point, it would be nice to see them win that last game of the year. It'd be nice to see the Vancouver Canucks hold up a Stanley Cup. And by God, it is an absolute shame that Henrik and Daniel never got to hold it. And it's not their fault they didn't get to hold it. And if people want to take me to task on this issue and say, oh, if Henrik and Daniel are these great players, they would have won the Stanley Cup, I can do a video on the great players that have won the Cup and the teams they've had behind them, and then compare it with the teams that Henrik and Daniel have had behind them. And if you look at any of the teams that have won the Stanley Cup, and the support they've had, and the depth they've had, and sometimes the luck they've had, and then you look at what Henrik and Daniel have had to put up with in Vancouver, it is going to be a completely different setup almost every time. I really don't think that if Patrick Kane was in Vancouver, the Canucks would win a Stanley Cup. Because the organization just seems to be repulsed by winning and success. And it's too bad because there have been some very good teams just this close. And here's the number one thing, and I'll end on this issue. If anybody's still with me at this point, congratulations. I applaud you for sticking with me through this entire video. The Canucks have never had a number one defenseman. They've never had a McInnes. They've never had a Niedermayer. They've never had a Pronger. They've never had a Chara. They have never had a number one defenseman. Look through all of the teams that have won the Stanley Cup over the last 30 years. Paul Coffey, Denny Potvin. For the Blackhawks, you got Duncan Keith. Tampa right now is Victor Hedman. Who's the Canucks' number one draft defenseman? Lume? Was it Lume back in 94? Was Jeff Brown the guy? Was Jovanovski really a number one defenseman, or was he more of a 2-3 guy? That minute-munching, absolute monster defenseman, they've never had it. So rather than look at the Sedins and point fingers at them, I look at the organization and say, you know, if we'd had a number one defenseman ever, we win the Stanley Cup. If we had one in 94, we had one in 2011, and I'm talking a guy who can control the game. I'm talking a PK Subban or a Shea Weber. It doesn't really matter to me. If they'd ever had either of those guys, that kind of player in their prime, they win the Stanley Cup. Because in 94, there's this guy named Brian Leetch playing for the Rangers. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but he's pretty darn good. And he himself dragged the Rangers to respectable results. And everybody points the finger and talks about how great Messier was. But without Mike Richter and Brian Leetch, Messier's promise goes nowhere, and the Rangers never win the Stanley Cup. The Oilers gone east win nothing without Brian Leetch and Mike Richter. So there you go. The history of the Canucks. You got it? It's the longest video I've done on this channel, I think, ever. And I apologize for that, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So thanks for watching. I will be back tomorrow. And again, if you made it through this video, congratulations. And I'm sorry at the same time, but it is what it is. So, yeah, as a Canucks fan, I really want to be wrong. Prove me wrong, Vancouver. Prove me wrong soon. I'm not a young man anymore. Look at me. Cats are ready to kill me. I need to be proven wrong. I'd love to see a Stanley Cup come to Vancouver just once as the winning team, not the road team. Not like when the Islanders won it in Vancouver and then the Bruins won it in Vancouver. Those were bad. I want the Canucks to win it in Vancouver just once. Just once. I don't care when, just once. Before I'm in the ground. And yet I don't think it'll happen. All right. Good night, all.